The great hall of the Galactic Council was quiet. Too quiet. Zekthar stood at the center of the room, his forearms folded behind his back. His gray skin looked almost silver under the bright lights. Around him, beings from 100 different worlds sat in their floating chairs, all watching him with different kinds of eyes. Today, they would decide if humans could join their council. The debate had been going on for weeks. Some said humans were too young, too violent. Others said they were interesting but dangerous. Zekthar had listened to all of it. Now it was his turn to speak. Honored Council, Zekthar began, his voice deep and steady. I have served as a warrior for 300 of your Earth years. I have fought in 17 major conflicts across 9 systems. I thought I understood war. The Vraxian ambassador shifted in her chair. Her blue tentacles moved slowly. You speak as if this has changed, General Zekthar. It has. Zekthar's black eyes swept across the room. 57 years ago, you sent me to observe the human species, to watch their conflicts, to understand how they fight. What I learned there, he paused, it will change how you think about these beings forever. The Altarian delegate made a clicking sound with his mandibles. We have read your reports, General. Humans fight crude wars with simple weapons. Their tactics are basic. They waste resources. This is why many believe they are not ready for galactic civilization. Zekthar looked at the insect-like being. Respected Altarian, you see only numbers on a screen. I was there. I walked among them. I watched them bleed and die. And what I saw... He stopped again, choosing his words carefully. What I saw will make you understand why every military expert in this council should fear these humans. Not because they are cruel, not because they are savage, but because they are something we have never encountered before. The room grew even quieter. Zekthar could hear the soft hum of the air recyclers. He could feel hundreds of different types of heartbeats, from the rapid flutter of the bird-like Zephyrians to the slow, powerful pulse of the massive Goliathan representative. I will tell you about the first human war I observed, Zekthar said. It was 1943 by their calendar, a global conflict they called World War II. My ship cloaked itself above their planet. I took a personal transport down to the surface disguised as one of their kind. The image projectors in the room activated. Suddenly the council chamber was filled with scenes from Earth. Muddy battlefields, burning cities, soldiers in green uniforms carrying metal weapons that seemed primitive compared to galactic technology. I landed in a place called France. Zekthar continued. The humans were fighting to free their people from an enemy that had taken over their land. I expected to see simple warfare. Territory taken for resources. Logical military objectives. He gestured and the images changed. Now they showed soldiers in foxholes, their faces dirty and tired. Instead, I saw something that made no sense. A human soldier named Miller was ordered to take a hill. Just a small hill with no strategic value. No resources. No important buildings. But taking it would cost many lives. Any reasonable commander would ignore such an objective. The council members leaned forward. This was basic military science. You did not spend soldiers' lives for worthless targets. Miller gathered his men. 23 soldiers. They knew most of them would die. The hill was defended by enemy machine guns. The approach was across open ground. It was suicide. Zekthar's voice grew quieter, but there was a village behind the hill. In that village were 30 human families. Men, women, children. If Miller did not take the hill, enemy artillery would destroy the village. The Corvani general touched a control. The images showed a small cluster of houses, smoke rising from chimneys. Ordinary beings living ordinary lives. Now, honored council, tell me, what is the logical military decision? The village had no strategic importance. The families were not Miller's people. He had never met them. They could not help him win the war. From any rational perspective, those lives had no tactical value. Several council members nodded. This was obvious. You preserved your forces for important objectives. Miller ordered the attack, Zekthar said simply. The room stirred. Confused sounds came from different species. This made no sense. He and his men charged across that open ground. The enemy guns cut them down. 18 of the 23 died in the first minute. Miller himself took a bullet through the chest. But the remaining 5 men kept going. They reached the hill. They took it. The images showed the aftermath. Bodies scattered across a muddy field. A few exhausted soldiers sitting on the captured hill, looking down at a small, safe village. I examined the tactical reports later. Zekthar continued.
Taking that hill changed nothing.
The war continued for 2 more years. The village was never strategically important. Miller's superior officers called it a waste of good soldiers. The Zephyrian ambassador's feathers ruffled in confusion. Then why did they do it? Was Miller mentally defective? Did he misunderstand his orders? Zekthar was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different, softer but somehow more serious. I spent 3 days in that village after the battle. I wanted to understand. The humans there kept talking about Miller and his men. They said words I had never heard before, words that did not translate properly into any galactic language. He paused, looking around the room at the confused faces. They called them heroes. They said Miller died with honor. They spoke of sacrifice. These concepts... Zekthar shook his head slowly. We had no words for them because we had never seen them before. The council chamber was absolutely silent now. I realized I was not observing standard warfare. I was watching something entirely different. These humans were not fighting for territory or resources or logical objectives. They were fighting for something my military training had never prepared me for. Zekthar touched the control again. The images changed to show other scenes, other battles, other humans making the same impossible choices. They were fighting for strangers, for people they would never meet, for children who would never know their names. They were dying for the simple idea that innocent lives should be protected, even if protecting them served no tactical purpose. The general's forearms spread wide, a gesture of amazement among his people. In 300 years of warfare across 9 systems, I had never seen anything like it. Species fight to survive. They fight for resources. They fight to expand territory. They fight for logical reasons. But humans, he paused, humans fight for reasons that have nothing to do with logic. And that honored council is what makes them dangerous. The Vraxian ambassador's tentacles moved faster now, showing agitation. Dangerous? You describe beings who waste their lives for no gain. This sounds foolish, not dangerous. Zekthar looked at her directly. Respected ambassador, imagine facing an enemy who will not retreat when they should, who will not surrender when they are beaten, who will not make logical choices when those choices would save their lives. Imagine fighting beings who care more about protecting others than protecting themselves. The room was very quiet. Imagine an entire species of soldiers who will choose death before they will let innocents suffer, who see every child, every family, every helpless being as worth dying for, even if they are strangers. Zekthar's black eyes moved across the council chamber, meeting the gaze of delegates from 100 worlds. That is what I observed in human warfare, and it was only the beginning. Zekthar walked to the center of the council chamber. The floating chairs adjusted their positions so every delegate could see him clearly. He could feel the tension in the room. His first story had confused them. This next one would disturb them. The human conflict I described was not unusual, he began. Over the next 15 Earth years, I observed 17 more of their wars. Each one showed me the same impossible pattern. Humans making choices that defied every rule of military science. The image projectors activated again. New scenes appeared around the chamber. A different war in a place called Korea. Snow-covered mountains. Soldiers in heavy coats fighting in bitter cold. I watched a human unit called the 27th Infantry, Zekthar said. They were ordered to hold a position called Heartbreak Ridge. The strategic value was minimal. The enemy could have simply gone around it. But the humans had decided this piece of frozen ground was important. The images showed exhausted soldiers digging foxholes in frozen earth. Their hands were wrapped in cloth. Their breath made white clouds in the cold air. The enemy attacked with 3 times their numbers. Any reasonable commander would order a retreat. Save the soldiers for a more important battle. This is basic military logic that every species understands. Several council members nodded. This was obvious tactical thinking. The human commander, a man named Richardson, gathered his officers. I was close enough to hear their conversation. They knew they could not win. They knew most of them would die. But behind their position was a supply road. If they retreated, enemy forces would cut off supplies to 3 human divisions. Zekthar gestured, and the images showed a simple dirt road winding through the mountains. Thousands of human soldiers would be trapped without food, ammunition, or medical supplies. They would surrender or die. Richardson could save his 200 men by retreating, but doing so would doom thousands of others. The Altarian delegates' mandibles clicked rapidly. The logical choice is clear. Preserve the smaller force. 200 lives versus thousands is simple mathematics. Yes, Zekthar agreed. That is exactly what any rational species would do. Richardson made a different choice. The images changed. Now they showed the battle. Human soldiers firing from shallow holes in the ground, enemy forces advancing up the slope, bodies falling in the snow. Richardson told his men the situation. He gave them a choice. They could retreat and save themselves, or they could stay and fight. There would be no shame in retreating. It was the smart choice. Zekthar paused, looking around the chamber. Every single human chose to stay. Confused sounds came from the delegate seats. The bird-like Zephyrians chirped in distress. The massive Goliathan representatives' stone-like features showed puzzlement. They fought for 3 days, Zekthar continued. The enemy threw wave after wave of soldiers at them. The humans ran out of ammunition and fought with knives. They ran out of knives and fought with rocks. When they ran out of rocks, they fought with their bare hands. The images showed the aftermath. A frozen hillside covered with bodies. The few surviving humans, wounded and barely alive, still holding their position. 197 of the 200 humans died on that hill. Only 3 survived, and they were badly wounded. But they held the road. The supplies got through. The 3 divisions were saved. The chamber was silent except for the hum of the life support systems. I interviewed one of the survivors in a human medical facility, Zekthar said. His name was Private Torres. He had lost his left arm and could barely speak. I asked him why he stayed, why he chose to die for soldiers he had never met. Zekthar's voice grew softer. He looked at me with confusion, as if my question made no sense. He said, "They were counting on us, sir. We couldn't let them down." The Corvani general touched his control panel. The images shifted to show different scenes, different wars, but always the same pattern. I saw this behavior again and again. In Vietnam, I watched human medics run into enemy fire to treat wounded soldiers. Not their own soldiers. Enemy soldiers. Beings who had been trying to kill them moments before. New images appeared. Humans in green uniforms carrying wounded fighters to safety. I observed a human named Jackson who was shot while treating an enemy soldier. As he lay dying, he crawled to another wounded enemy and tried to bandage the being's wounds. He died while trying to save the life of someone who had shot him. The Vraxian ambassador's tentacles moved in agitation. This is not warfare. This is madness. No species behaves this way. That is what I thought, Zekthar replied. I began to study human military doctrine, trying to understand. What I found made even less sense. He gestured, and the images changed to show human military academies. Young humans in uniforms learning to fight. They teach their soldiers something called the Code of Honor. Rules about how to behave in war. These rules often require humans to act against their own interests. They must help wounded enemies. They must protect civilians even at the cost of military advantage. They must choose death rather than abandon their comrades. The Altarian delegates' compound eyes focused intently. These rules would make victory impossible. Why would they? Cripple their own forces this way? I asked the same question, Zekthar said. I spent months studying their behavior. I watched a human unit in Afghanistan face an impossible situation. They were ordered to secure a building, but there were civilians inside, children. The images showed a modern city, concrete buildings, human soldiers with advanced weapons. The logical approach was simple. Use their weapons to destroy the building from a distance. This would eliminate enemy forces and secure the objective with minimal human casualties. The council members waited. This was obvious tactical thinking. Instead, the humans went into the building room by room, floor by floor. They knew enemies were waiting to kill them. They knew many of them would die, but they could not risk harming the civilians. The images showed the brutal fight inside the building. humans moving carefully through dark corridors, checking every room. 12 humans died clearing that building. The mission took 6 hours instead of 6 minutes. They could have accomplished the same objective in moments with no human losses. Zekthar turned to face the council directly. But at the end, 43 civilian families were safe. Children who would grow up to have their own children. Lives preserved because humans chose the hard path instead of the easy one. The chamber was very quiet. Zekthar could see the delegates struggling to understand. I began to realize that humans do not fight wars the way we do. We fight to win. They fight to protect. We calculate losses and gains. They calculate right and wrong. We see enemies to be destroyed. They see beings who might be saved. He touched the control panel one more time. The images disappeared, leaving only the soft lighting of the council chamber. Every human military victory I observed came at a terrible cost. Not because they lacked skill or weapons, but because they refused to use the most efficient methods. They would rather lose battles than compromise their principles. The Zephyrian ambassador's feathers rustled nervously. How can such beings be dangerous? They seem to handicap themselves at every opportunity. Zekthar looked at the bird-like being with his black eyes. Honored ambassador, imagine facing an enemy who will not break, who will not retreat, who will not abandon their values even when those values make victory impossible. Imagine fighting beings who see death as preferable to dishonor. He paused, letting the words sink in. Now imagine that same enemy looking at your own actions, judging your own choices by their impossible standards, wondering why you do not protect the weak, why you do not sacrifice for strangers, why you choose efficiency over honor. The council chamber grew even quieter. That is when I began to understand what we were really dealing with. Humans do not just fight differently. They think differently. They see the universe differently. And once they join galactic civilization, Zekathar's voice trailed off, leaving the thought unfinished. Around the chamber, delegates from 100 worlds sat in uncomfortable silence, beginning to understand what the Corvani general was trying to tell them. Zekthar moved closer to the council seats. The delegates could see his face more clearly now. There were lines around his black eyes that had not been there before he went to Earth, deep lines that spoke of things that had changed him. The human wars I observed grew more complex over time, he said. Their weapons became more advanced. Their tactics became more sophisticated. I thought perhaps they would become more rational, more like us. The image projectors hummed to life again. This time they showed sleek aircraft and guided missiles. Human soldiers with electronic equipment and advanced body armor. Instead, their technology made their impossible behavior worse. The Goliathan representative's voice rumbled through the chamber like distant thunder. Explain this contradiction, General. Better weapons should lead to more efficient warfare. That is what I believed, Zekthar replied. I observed a human conflict in 1991. They called it the Gulf War. I expected to see them use their superior technology to crush their enemies quickly and efficiently. The images showed vast deserts, machines of war moving across sand dunes, explosions lighting up the night sky. The humans could have destroyed their enemy's entire infrastructure in days. They could have eliminated all enemy forces with minimal risk to themselves. Their weapons were that advanced. Several council members nodded. This was logical warfare. Instead, they spent weeks planning how to minimize casualties. Not their own casualties, enemy casualties, civilian casualties. They created something called smart bombs that could hit specific targets without damaging nearby buildings. The confused sounds from the delegate seats were becoming familiar now. Zekthar had heard them many times during his years of observation. I watched human pilots refuse to fire on legitimate military targets because civilians might be injured. I saw them abort missions that would have shortened the war because the risk to non-combatants was too high. The images changed to show human soldiers on patrol. They moved carefully through city streets, checking each building. But the most disturbing thing I observed was their treatment of prisoners. Zekthar paused, choosing his words carefully. I watched human soldiers capture enemy fighters who had been trying to kill them moments before. According to galactic military standards, these prisoners should be interrogated for information, then either executed or enslaved. The Altarian delegates' mandibles clicked in agreement. This is standard procedure for prisoner management. The humans did something different, Zekthar said quietly. They gave the prisoners food, clean water, medical care. They treated their wounds. They protected them from harm. The chamber fell silent. This made no sense whatsoever. I observed a human medic named Williams treating an enemy prisoner who had been badly injured. The prisoner had killed 3 of Williams's friends earlier that day. Williams spent 4 hours performing surgery to save the being's life. The images showed a human in medical clothing working over a wounded figure. The human's hands moved with careful precision, trying to repair damage caused by his own people's weapons. I approached Williams afterward. I asked him why he saved the life of someone who had murdered his comrades. His answer, Zekthar shook his head slowly. His answer was that the being was wounded and needed help. Nothing else mattered to him. The Vraxian ambassador's tentacles writhed in confusion. This behavior serves no purpose. It wastes resources and helps enemies. That is what I reported to my commanders, Zekthar agreed. But I continued to observe. I watched later human conflicts, Afghanistan, Iraq, peacekeeping missions across their planet. The pattern never changed. The images shifted to show more recent scenes, human soldiers in desert camouflage, urban warfare in crowded cities. If anything, their commitment to these impossible principles grew stronger. I watched human units in Afghanistan take enormous risks to avoid harming civilians. They would clear buildings by hand instead of using explosives. They would walk through minefields rather than call in airstrikes that might hurt innocent people. New images appeared, humans moving carefully through dangerous areas, checking each step. I observed a mission where a human unit was ordered to eliminate an enemy stronghold. The target was in a populated area. The logical approach was to evacuate the humans and level the entire district. The council members waited. This was obvious military procedure. Instead, the human commander, a woman named Martinez, spent 3 days planning a precision assault. Her soldiers went in on foot. They cleared the stronghold room by room, floor by floor. 7 humans died in that operation. The images showed the aftermath. A single building destroyed with surgical precision, the surrounding area untouched. The mission could have been completed in minutes with no human casualties, but Martinez refused to risk civilian lives. She chose to sacrifice her own soldiers rather than harm innocents. Zekthar looked around the chamber at the confused faces. I began to understand that human warfare was not about winning. It was about something they called doing the right thing, even when the right thing was tactically impossible. The Corvani general activated a new set of images. These showed something different. Humans not in combat, but in prison cells. I also observed what happened when humans were captured. Standard interrogation procedures should break any being within days. Pain, isolation, psychological pressure. These methods work on every known species. The images showed stark rooms with harsh lighting. Humans sitting alone, waiting. I watched human prisoners endure torture that would have broken my own people in hours. They were beaten, starved, subjected to psychological warfare designed to destroy their minds. Some were held for years. The chamber grew very quiet. Everyone understood the implications. They did not break. They did not reveal military secrets. They did not betray their comrades. I watched humans choose death rather than give information that might harm others. The images changed to show a specific human, a pilot who had been captured after his aircraft was shot down. This human, named Morrison, was tortured for 6 years. 6 years of daily beating, starvation, isolation. His captors tried everything. They threatened his family. They told him his country had forgotten him. They offered him freedom if he would simply make a propaganda recording. Zekthar's voice grew softer. Morrison refused every offer. He endured 6 years of hell rather than say words that might harm his people's cause. When he was finally freed, he had lost 40 pounds of body weight. His bones had been broken so many times they had healed incorrectly. But his spirit was unbroken. The general touched his control panel. The images disappeared. I realized I was not observing normal warfare. I was watching something that had no equivalent in galactic civilization. Humans had turned fighting into a form of moral philosophy. They did not just want to win battles. They wanted to win them correctly. The Zephyrian ambassador's feathers ruffled nervously. But surely this behavior has limits. Surely there are situations where they would choose survival over these principles. Zekthar looked at the bird-like being with something that might have been sadness. I thought the same thing. I spent years looking for situations where humans would abandon their impossible standards, where they would choose the logical path over the moral one. He paused, remembering. I never found such a situation. In every case, no matter how desperate their circumstances, humans chose to do what they believed was right, rather than what would help them survive. The council chamber was absolutely silent now. I began to file reports, recommending extreme caution in any future contact with humans. Not because they were aggressive or expansionist, but because they were unpredictable, because they made choices that no rational being could anticipate. Zekthar looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of delegates from 100 different worlds. How do you fight an enemy who will choose death over dishonor? How do you negotiate with beings who value abstract principles more than their own lives? How do you understand a species that sees the universe in terms of right and wrong, rather than advantage and disadvantage? The questions hung in the air like a challenge. That was when my government decided to make contact, when we revealed ourselves to humanity, and that, Zekthar's voice grew very quiet. That was when we discovered the truly terrifying thing about humans. Zekthar stood perfectly still in the center of the council chamber. The delegates could see something in his posture had changed. The confident military bearing was still there, but underneath it was something else. Something that looked almost like fear. First contact was my responsibility, he said quietly. After 50 years of observation, I was chosen to represent our government in initial negotiations with humanity. I thought I understood them. I thought I knew what to expect. The image projectors showed a new scene. A large building with flags from many human nations. Humans in formal clothing walking through corridors lined with art and sculptures. We arranged a meeting at a place called the United Nations, their global governing body. I expected them to be curious about our technology, our weapons, our military capabilities. This is how first contact proceeds with every species. Several council members nodded. This was standard protocol for new civilizations. The human delegation arrived exactly on time. They were led by a woman named Secretary General Chen. She brought military advisors, scientists, diplomats, all the people you would expect for such a historic moment. The images showed humans sitting around a large table. Their faces showed wonder and excitement, but also something else, something careful and thoughtful. I began the meeting with standard procedure. I displayed our technological achievements, our faster-than-light travel, our energy weapons, our defensive systems. I expected them to be impressed, to ask how they could acquire such capabilities. Zekthar paused, and when he continued, his voice carried confusion that had never fully faded. Instead, Secretary General Chen asked if we had ended war on our worlds. The chamber stirred. This was an unusual question for first contact. I told her that yes, most galactic civilizations had moved beyond large-scale conflict, that we had learned to resolve disputes through negotiation and economic pressure, that warfare was inefficient and wasteful. The images shifted to show the human faces around the table. They were listening intently, but their expressions were becoming troubled. Chen asked what happened to species that refused to negotiate, to planets that continued fighting among themselves. I explained that such civilizations were quarantined until they developed beyond their violent phase, sometimes for centuries. Zekthar looked around the council chamber. The humans went very quiet. I thought they were impressed by our wisdom. Instead, one of their military advisors, a general named Patterson, asked a question that confused me completely. The Corvani general activated the image system again. Now it showed a human in military uniform, his face serious and troubled. Patterson asked, "What about species that are being enslaved or exterminated by others? Do you help them?" I told him that we do not interfere in internal conflicts, that each species must solve its own problems. The silence in the council chamber was becoming uncomfortable. The human delegation exchanged looks I could not interpret. Chen asked to speak privately with her team. They left the room for an hour. When they returned, they looked different. Zekthar struggled to find the right words. Chen thanked us for making contact. She said humanity was honored to learn they were not alone in the universe. But then she asked something that no species had ever asked before. The images showed Chen standing at the table, her hands folded, her face grave. She asked if we could teach humanity how to be better than they were. Confused sounds came from the delegate seats. This request made no sense. I asked what she meant. Chen said that meeting us made humans realize how violent and primitive they still were, She said they wanted to learn our methods of peaceful conflict resolution, our ways of ending disputes without bloodshed. The Altarian delegate's mandibles clicked rapidly. This is absurd. Species do not ask to be changed. They ask for technology, for power, for advantage. That is what I thought, Zekthar agreed. I told Chen that humans would develop naturally over time, that their violent phase would pass as they matured. But she shook her head. The images changed to show different scenes: human children in schools, human scientists working in laboratories, human families living their daily lives. Chen said humanity could not wait for natural development. She said that every day they delayed, people were suffering. Wars were continuing. Children were dying. She asked if we had technologies that could help them communicate better, understand each other better, resolve conflicts more peacefully. Zekthar's voice grew quieter. She was asking us to help them become less human, to help them overcome their own nature. The council chamber was absolutely silent. Over the following months, I attended dozens of meetings with human representatives. Every conversation followed the same pattern. They would ask about our achievements, then immediately ask how those achievements could be used to reduce suffering. The images showed various human officials and scientists. All of them had the same earnest, troubled expressions. They asked if our medical technology could help them cure diseases faster, if our transportation systems could help them deliver aid to disaster areas more efficiently, if our communication networks could help them coordinate peacekeeping efforts. The Vraxian ambassador's tentacles moved slowly, showing deep thought. They sought to use galactic technology for humanitarian purposes. Every single request fell into that category, Zekthar confirmed. They showed no interest in military applications, no desire for conquest or expansion. They wanted our technology to help them save lives. The general touched his control panel and new images appeared. These showed human soldiers, but they were not fighting. They were building schools, distributing food, treating sick children. I observed human military forces being deployed across their planet, not for conquest but for humanitarian missions, earthquake relief, flood response, medical aid. They were using their warriors as healers. Several council members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but the most disturbing thing was how humans reacted when they learned about galactic civilization, about the conflicts and injustices that exist between our species. The images changed to show star charts and galactic maps. Areas marked in different colors showed territorial disputes, resource conflicts, and population movements. Chen asked about the Andraxian refugee crisis, the civil war on Vega Prime, the slave markets in the Outer Rim. When I told her these were internal matters that the Galactic Council did not address, she looked stricken. Zekthar paused, remembering that moment. She asked how many beings were suffering while the Council maintained its non-interference policies. When I gave her the estimates, millions of slaves, billions of refugees, entire planets in economic collapse, she actually began to cry. The chamber stirred. Emotional displays during diplomatic negotiations were considered primitive behavior. Patterson, the military advisor, asked if humans would be permitted to assist these populations once they joined galactic civilization. I told him that would be unprecedented, that no species had ever concerned itself with the welfare of others. The images showed human faces filled with an emotion that had no equivalent in most galactic languages. A mixture of sadness and determination that spoke of impossible dreams. The human delegation went quiet again. Chen finally said that perhaps humanity was not ready to join galactic civilization, not because they were too primitive, but because they could not accept a universe where beings ignored each other's suffering. Zekthar looked around the council chamber, meeting the eyes of delegates from 100 worlds. I filed my final report 3 months later. I recommended extreme caution in admitting humans to the galactic community, not because they were violent or aggressive, but because they were moral revolutionaries who would try to change everything we had built. The Corvani generals, voice grew very soft. I warned my government that humans would not accept the way we do business, that they would ask uncomfortable questions about every policy, every tradition, every compromise we had made in the name of stability. He paused, looking directly at the council leadership. I told them that admitting humans to galactic civilization would be like introducing a conscience to a machine. Everything would change. The chamber was quiet except for the soft hum of the life support systems. What I did not expect was how quickly the change would begin. or how much humans would accomplish even before they were officially admitted to our community. Zekthar's black eyes swept across the assembled delegates. Because humans, as I have learned, do not wait for permission to do what they believe is right. Zekthar walked slowly around the center of the council chamber. His forearms were relaxed now, no longer held in the formal military posture he had maintained throughout his testimony. When he spoke again, his voice carried something that had not been there before, something that might have been hope. Honored council, I have told you about human warfare, about their impossible choices and illogical sacrifices, about their commitment to principles that should make them weak. I have explained why my government feared admitting them to galactic civilization. The image projectors remained dark. For the first time during his presentation, Zekthar needed no visual aids. The delegates were focused entirely on his words. But I have not told you what happened after first contact, what humans did while we debated their membership, what they accomplished with limited technology and no official standing in galactic affairs. The Vraxian ambassador leaned forward in her floating chair. General, are you saying humans have been active in galactic space without authorization? I am saying much more than that, Zekthar replied quietly. I am saying that humans have been quietly revolutionizing galactic civilization while we argued about whether they were ready to join it. Confused sounds filled the chamber. Several delegates activated their translation systems, thinking they had misunderstood. 3 years ago, the Andromedian colony of New Haven sent a distress signal. Their agricultural systems had failed due to a viral infection. The colony of 40,000 beings faced starvation within months. The signal was received by our monitoring stations but classified as an internal matter. The Altarian delegates' compound eyes focused intently. Standard protocol. Colony failures are the responsibility of their parent civilization. The Andromedian government requested aid from the Galactic Relief Fund. The application was processed according to proper procedures. It would have taken 18 months for approval, then another 6 months for aid delivery. Zekthar paused, looking around the chamber. The colony would have been dead for over a year before help arrived. The council members stirred uncomfortably. Bureaucratic delays were an accepted part of galactic governance. Human monitoring stations also detected the distress signal, without consulting any galactic authority, without requesting permission or filing proper documentation. A human cargo fleet changed course for New Haven. The chamber erupted in surprised sounds. This was completely unprecedented. The human ships arrived at New Haven 6 weeks after the distress signal. They brought food, medical supplies, and agricultural specialists. They also brought something no galactic relief mission had ever included. Zekthar's voice grew softer. They brought hope. The Goliathan representative's stone-like features showed confusion. Explain this abstract concept, General. The humans did not simply deliver supplies and leave. They stayed. Human agricultural scientists worked day and night to develop a cure for the viral infection. Human engineers rebuilt the colony's farming systems. Human doctors treated beings suffering from malnutrition. Zekthar began walking again, his steps echoing in the quiet chamber. But most importantly, human families opened their homes to Andromedian children who had no food. They shared their own meals. They taught these alien children to laugh again. The image projectors activated, showing scenes from New Haven. Human and Andromedian beings working together in fields, children of different species playing in the same areas. When the crisis was over, the humans did not ask for payment. They did not establish trade agreements. They did not claim political influence. They simply returned to their ships and continued on their original course. The Zephyrian ambassador's feathers ruffled in confusion. What did they gain from this intervention? Nothing, Zekthar said simply. They gained nothing except the knowledge that 40,000 beings would continue to live. The chamber fell silent. This was not an isolated incident, Zekthar continued. Human ships have responded to 17 similar emergencies in the past 3 years, always without authorization, always without requesting compensation. Always at considerable risk to themselves. New images appeared. Different worlds, different crises, but always the same pattern. Human ships arriving to help beings they had never met. 2 years ago, the mining platform Epsilon 7 suffered a critical system failure. 300 Corvani workers were trapped in deep shafts with no way to reach the surface. The official rescue mission would have taken weeks to organize. Zekthar's voice grew proud. A human exploration vessel was in the system conducting mineral surveys. They detected the emergency and immediately changed course. Using improvised equipment and techniques that violated a dozen safety protocols, they extracted all 300 miners in 18 hours. The images showed humans in makeshift protective gear descending into alien mining shafts. Their faces showed determination and focus as they worked to save lives. The human captain, a woman named Rodriguez, was officially reprimanded by her government for exceeding her authority. Unofficially, she received the highest civilian honor humans can award. Several council members exchanged looks. This behavior was becoming a pattern. Last year, the Zephyrian research station on Kepler 442b detected an incoming asteroid that would destroy their facility. The evacuation ships could not arrive in time. 200 scientists and their families faced certain death. The chamber grew very quiet. The Zephyrian delegation leaned forward in their seats. A human military patrol was conducting exercises 3 systems away. They detected the Zephyrian distress signal and immediately broke formation. Ignoring direct orders to maintain their patrol route, they jumped to Kepler 442b at maximum speed. The images showed human warships using their weapons to break apart the asteroid. Pieces of rock exploding in bright flashes against the darkness of space. The human ships destroyed the asteroid with 47 minutes to spare. They then provided emergency transport for the Zephyrian families, treating alien children with the same care they would show their own offspring. Zekthar stopped walking and faced the council directly. The human ship captains were court-martialed for disobeying orders. All of them said they would make the same choice again. The Zephyrian ambassador spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. Those were our people. Our children. The humans saved them? Yes, Zekthar said simply. And they have been doing the same thing across the galaxy for 3 years. Quietly, without recognition. Without permission. The general activated the image system one final time. Now the chamber filled with a comprehensive display. Star charts showing human ship movements. Reports from dozens of worlds, testimonials from hundreds of rescued beings. Honored Council humans have been unofficially members of galactic civilization since the day we made contact. They have been acting as the guardians and protectors we never learned to be. The chamber was absolutely silent. They do not wait for bureaucratic approval to save lives. They do not require trade agreements to share their resources. They do not need political alliances to risk their lives for strangers. Zekthar looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of delegates from 100 worlds. The question before us is not whether humans are ready to join galactic civilization. The question is whether galactic civilization is ready to officially recognize what humans have already become. The Corvani general's voice grew very soft. They are already here. They are already helping. They are already changing us one rescue at a time, one life at a time, one impossible choice at a time. He paused, letting the words sink in. We can vote to exclude them, but it will not stop them from being who they are. We can deny them membership, but it will not prevent them from saving lives. We can reject their application, but it will not change the fact that they have already made the galaxy a better place. Zekthar stepped back, his testimony complete. Honored delegates, I recommend we vote to admit humanity to the Galactic Council, not because they need us, but because we need them. Because they represent the conscience we never developed, the moral courage we never learned, the compassion we forgot was possible. The chamber remained silent for a long moment. Then slowly, the Andromedian delegate stood. The colony of New Haven cast its vote in favor of human membership. The Zephyrian ambassador rose next. The Kepler Research Foundation votes in favor. One by one, delegates throughout the chamber stood. Beings whose people had been saved by humans. Species who had witnessed human compassion firsthand, civilizations that had been touched by impossible human choices. But it was not just the rescued who voted yes. The Altarian delegate stood, his mandibles clicking in what might have been approval. The Altarian Commonwealth recognizes that logic alone is insufficient for true civilization. The massive Goliathan representative's voice rumbled through the chamber. The stone worlds acknowledge that strength without compassion is mere brutality. Even the Vraxian ambassador, her tentacles moving in complex patterns of thought, finally rose. The Vraxian Empire votes to admit humanity and to learn from their example. As the final votes were recorded, an aide rushed into the chamber with an urgent message. The council secretary read it quickly, then looked up with an expression of amazement. Honored delegates, I have just received word that human ships are en route to the Tau Ceti system.